Hi and welcome back to my channel. In this week's video you have the next recent reads vlog or recent reads update. I don't really move from this spot at all. I am starting it on a Wednesday. I realized yesterday that I had already had another book that I finished and I could have started it earlier, but I don't have that book physically, so I didn't remember it. So I'm going to start with that one, and that is one of my Rick Riordan Presents imprint books. The Fury of the Dragon Goddess by, I think it's Sarwat Chadha. I'm not 100% certain on how that is pronounced. I should have looked that up ahead of time. Anyway, this is book 2. I don't know if there are going to be more books in the series. I read the first book a couple of years ago. I remember because it was on my Atlanta trip. I remember thinking, oh, this is engaging, this is interesting. It's not my favorite. I don't remember what I ended up rating it, but it must have been low enough that I didn't want to go out and buy it. I have changed my mind about that. I don't know what I saw or read in that book that didn't gel with me at much. Maybe it was just the timing of when I read it, because book 2 really vibed with me. I really enjoyed it. It started off really well because listening to it, as soon as the narration starts, I'm like, oh my word, that's Kieran from the Discord of God. Well, the Course of Dragons series. My favorite series, hands down. I listened to the whole thing as audiobooks. This narrator, and I should have looked up his name, he does a phenomenal job. I have a lot of really strong, really positive feelings associated with that narrator, with that story, and how he narrates it. And interestingly, I think Kieran in the Course of Dragons series and Sikander in the, I don't remember what the series is called, but in the Fury of the Dragon Goddess, they're very similar characters. And I find it really interesting how Chadha told this story. The main character is the son of Afghani refugees, and his brother died in a motorcycle accident back in Afghanistan. He went back to try to help rebuild the country. He loved plants, died in a motorcycle accident. It really affected the family. In book 1, Sikander, there was another thing that came about where his brother sent him back this particular flower. I forget what it was called, but basically it gave Sikander immortality and also brought him into this whole world of, what is it, Babylonian mythology? Mesopotamian mythology. Chadha also balances that with Sikander and his family's devout Muslim faith. I thought, that's an approach that you don't necessarily see in books like this, but I thought he handled it really well. And in this book, Sikander's going on a vacation trip to visit his brother's best friend, who is now this model. He's like vain, but also like heartwarming. Just a quirky character like that. He's in London, somewhere along the way. In the first book, Sikander also picked up a companion who is a demon and is hilarious. I love those quirky sort of side characters. Fantastic. This one is just so funny. He also has this best friend who is the daughter of Ishtar, a Mesopotamian goddess. She's the adopted daughter, but was raised and trained and everything in this. And they want to get back this certain tablet. That is the inciting incident in this book. This tablet basically can control destinies, can control fate. And something happens where Sikander, without realizing it while he's holding the tablet, changes something really significant. And what happens is the ripple effects of changing that something significant and how that particular stone is used throughout the rest of the book. Just really, really well done. I was captivated the entire time. And the way it wraps up conclusively, where this could be the end. I think the first book also did that, but then you have a second book. What I want is for this to not be the last book, because I want more of this. I think this book just came out last year, so I'm definitely going to be adding it to my purchase list along with the first book and be including it up on my shelf, which you can't see up there, which is going to be my Rick Riordan Presents imprint shelf. That was a success. The next book that I listened to on audiobook, and I have not yet finished Room to Dream, even though I'm very close, just because I haven't read anything physically yet. The next audiobook that I read, I had a feeling when I was looking at this series, putting it on my TBR, it's one of the series that I read before, way before I started watching BookTube and thinking about this. And I thought, you know what? I don't know that I'm actually going to read every book remaining in this series, but I'm going to give the first book a shot. And if I don't like it, or something just, it's not as successful, I'm going to DNF the rest of the series and be totally okay with that. And that is the Al Capone series. And book 2 is Al Capone Shines My Shoes. One of the things that I forgot is the main character, Moose, that's his nickname. I don't remember his real name. So his dad is someone fairly higher up in the security detail for Alcatraz, and that's why they live on the island. And there's a group of kids who live there. And Moose is the younger of the 2 kids that his parents have. And his older sister, I think her name is Nancy, but I don't remember it exactly, is clearly on the spectrum. Very, very obvious manifestations of her autism. Obviously, at that time, a lot less was known about people who behaved this way, about what best practices were to help them, to make life easier for them, help them operate in this world. And there were a lot of really, really negative stereotypes and actions and ways that people spoke about them. I think in the first book there was a lot more of it from this one other guard who's a piece of garbage towards his sister. And this grown man hates this 16-year-old girl. Get over yourself, dude. At the beginning of this, his sister, Moose's sister, has the opportunity to go to a specific school on the mainland in San Francisco. Somehow, it's not explained exactly why, Al Capone has helped Moose get his sister into this school. And so Moose feels somewhat obligated to pay back to Al Capone somehow because, you know, he wants to live. So some of the stuff, there were just a few things that as it went along were not blatantly objectionable. That were not blatantly wrong with the characterizations of the characters themselves or how the plot was moving or etc. or it being a middle grade novel. But there were just a few things that rubbed me the wrong way. For example, Moose has this friend that he knows from school. They go to school on the mainland and the friend comes to visit. And the friend says some really misogynistic, sexist things about another one of his friends who lives on the island and plays baseball. Yes, I know that's true to the times, but that doesn't mean that you have to include it. That doesn't mean that you don't say something about it, because then you're sort of normalizing it by including it, but not having anyone push back on it. And sometimes that character, the friend character, would say something about Annie or another one of the female characters. Moose would sort of contradict that in his head, but he would never say anything to his friend. And then later on, he would go to his friend to ask him for dating advice. So clearly, he doesn't see anything objectionably wrong with how this friend is talking about this other girl. And there were just a few of those things just sprinkled throughout that just rubbed me the wrong way. This is a book that's supposed to be given to young, impressionable kids. Yes, did things like that happen? Yes, did boys grow up with ingrained, built-in misogyny? A lot of them did. Not all of them, but a lot of them did. We do not have to keep perpetuating that. We do not have to write a book in 2009 that perpetuates those same awful stereotypes without doing something to contradict them. And there were just enough of those sprinkled throughout this book that it made me pull back from the narrative as itself, and I just could never get into it really. I think I'm going to rate this at 3 stars. It might get a 2.5 just because those things just felt particularly egregious to me. And that does mean that I take 2 more books off of my to-read list because I will not be continuing in this story. My plan for tonight is to hopefully finish Room to Dream because I'm very close to finishing that. On audiobook, I started last night book 3 of the Sisters Grimm series. So I may have 2 more books to update you on tomorrow because those are both fairly short books and I need to get moving on that front. I know that sounded like I was signing off, and I was. I turned the camera off and everything, but then I looked over and there's a pile of books that I brought over specifically to talk about in the vlog, because I'm going to leave my unboxings just for book boxes today and tomorrow, but I'm not going to be at school tomorrow because I'm doing evaluations of other teachers. But anyway, today and tomorrow, they're having a book fair at my high school. And at first I was like, oh, okay, the book fair, that's cool. I'll go, I'll probably buy books. But then I read that this book fair was not being put on by Scholastic. No, it's being put on by my local independent bookstore, my favorite independent bookstore in the area. And like, okay, I am going and I am purchasing books. I'm so excited about this. I actually ended up talking to a few of the kids from various classes that were brought to come look at the books. Like one of the girls there, I was talking about how I'd read most of the books on the fantasy table that they had set up. And so she picked up a couple books and was like, have you read this one? What is it like? And she'd read a couple of the other ones, comp titles. And it's just so much fun to nerd it out and talk to people about books. That makes me really excited for what's coming up next in my career, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. I realized I haven't said anything about that, but I'm going to talk about that later. Anyway, the books themselves. Interestingly enough, I got only 2 regular novels. The rest are graphic novels. Granted, a lot of that was because I'd read all of or most of the books on the fantasy table, or they were Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, or House of Flame and Shadow, which I'm not reading. No thanks. Anyway, I also, and this is super cool, I have a student teacher this semester, and she's also a bookworm who loves history. So I'm match made in heaven. Fantastic. I wanted to say thank you to her, even though like she's doing this for her schooling and everything. It's such a help to have someone else in the classroom, and it is so much fun for me to get to do this. So I bought her a book. I don't have that here, obviously. She has that. It's a play on Shakespeare, I think. I didn't look at the book itself, but anyway, so I have 6 books here. I bought 7 altogether, and I just realized that for my records, I don't have accurate records because I went and threw the receipt away and didn't keep it with me. Setting that aside, I want to talk briefly about each of these books. I know I have heard about every single one of these books, heard really good things about all of them. And yes, for one of these, I have 2 other books in this companion series. Have I read either of them? No. Why did I buy a 3rd one at full price? Because I love the idea of Jane Austen and murder mystery puns. Sense and secondary murder. I had to get that. I have Pride and Premeditation and Manslaughter Park. I had to get it, and it is ridiculously floppy. The other one, I have heard things about this book. It's an older title. I know that this cover, the cover that I have, is not the original cover. Yeah, published in 2015. I've heard good things about it, and as I've gotten more into alternative history, I'm willing to give this one a shot, and that is Wolf by Ryan Groudon. One of our librarians mentioned that Ryan Groudon lived near where I live, I think in Asheville, so not the exact same city or like near here, but it's near-ish. That was a weird sentence, but anyway, I'm excited to get to this one. Alternative history where Hitler won and they continue genetic experiments on people, and this girl gains the ability to shapeshift and is able to escape and is going to do a motorcycle race to try to meet Hitler so that she can kill him. The others are all graphic novels. 3 of them are fiction. 1 is a memoir. I've heard amazing things about all of these books, hence why I just went ahead and bought them, because not only does it support M. Judgin, but it also supports the library at my school. So I am all for supporting libraries, supporting independent bookstores. And yes, am I giving myself a little bit of an excuse to spend money? Of course, why not? This is The Magic Fish. This is a graphic novel memoir. And I don't remember any of the details, so I'm not going to try to butcher it because it is this person's real life. I'm excited about that. I've heard good things about this. I've heard that this one is adorable. This is The Prince and the Dressmaker. She is a dressmaker by trade, and the prince needs a new wardrobe, and so she's hired like as a tailor, and like he likes to wear dresses, and they end up falling in love. So I think that's super cute. This next one is a Netflix series. I've not watched this or remember anything about it, but it is Nimona. I've just heard, again, and I'm repeating myself for like the 15th time, I've heard really good things about this. And I don't remember where I heard about this one, but there's another book that I got in my comics subscription. I think it was The Knight and the Squire, and I thought it was this one. That one turned out to be super cute too, but this one is Squire, and this one is big. So if I need to get caught up on my pages goal, I just gave myself 4 easy ways to do that. So I wanted to talk about those here because I want to leave the unboxing videos for actual unboxings. Okay, it's Thursday. I am back with an update. Like I said yesterday that I might be back because I did in fact finish 2 books yesterday. That's not the accomplishment necessarily that it seems, because I had only like 40-ish pages left in this book, and then I had a couple hours left in the audiobook of this one, and they're both middle grade, but I actually have a whole other book to talk about. I have 3 books finished. Maybe I'm getting back on my reading mojo. Okay, so let's talk about the books. First off is going to be Room to Dream by Kelly Yang. This is book 3 in the series. There are 5 books now. I don't know if she's done with the series or not, or she plans to keep going. But in this book is set around Christmas time of her 7th grade year. And the family has this opportunity to, for the first time since they came to America, to go back to China to visit family. And so a large section of the book takes place when they go back to China to visit family, and so much has changed about China in their time away. This was the time in China where the economy really started taking off, and it became, or was starting to become, the China that most people know today. And so they go back and it's very different. They also one of their weeklies goes back, well, he's not a weekly anymore. He's a co-owner and works at the motel, but he goes with them to China. He's African American, and she mentions the different ways that colorism, ways that people were responding to seeing someone like Hank. I guess a lot of them like really hadn't ever in their lives. And there's a lot going on there with seeing the financial pressures, the comparisons of their lives, and also going on in this, before they'd left, there were some changes that had started to happen for Mia and her friend group, because one friend, Lupe, is really trying hard to advance academically and is taking high school classes, and Mia feels like this is sort of fracturing their friendship. But that's sort of set on hold while they go back to China. And in China, Mia ends up getting a column in a newspaper for middle school students, and it's written in English, and it's a way for these students to try to better their English. So much of this whole series is based on Kelly Yang's own life. When she was 11, her family did go back to China to visit. She did get a column in that sort of newspaper for middle schoolers, and her columns were compiled and published as memoirs. She was a published author at age 12. Did not know that. In this book, she includes some of those columns in there, and some of the precociousness that I've seen with Mia, that I'm like, would a 11, 12-year-old actually speak and think this way? Based on those actual columns of Kelly Yang's from when she was that age, because Mia is based on Kelly when she was that age, I believe it. But that whole narrative with the whole aspect of going back to China is only about 50% of the narrative. And I think that's what did this book a disservice. It's not my favorite installment. She still did a lot of amazing things. But the narrative felt really split. It felt like there were themes that were underlying the narrative moving forward in their trip to China. And then when they got back to California, and before they went back to China, so the whole time they were in California, there was another theme going on through there with this big mega corporation coming in, buying up the hotels in the nearby area, and, you know, monopolies and etc. And both of these issues were present throughout the narrative, but they were so separated by location that it felt a little disjointed. And I know that because this narrative is based on her life, that's how her life unfolded. And so I get that. It just felt like a little bit of a mixed bag reading experience. However, Kelly Yang is such a talented author that she brings it back home at the end of the book. And there was a point where, she got me with a response, one of her quote unquote fan mail letters. I was tearing up. Yang knows how to bring things together and talk about and make an impact in various different ways. So overall, this is probably my least favorite of the 3 that I've read, but it's still a really solid book. Speaking of another book that is book 3 in a series, I read The Problem Child by Michael Buckley. I really like the reissued covers. I think this was the 10th anniversary reissued covers. The Problem Child picks up almost immediately after where book 2 leaves off on sort of a cliffhanger. And it takes a little bit to get into it because it's not a direct sequel. She's like having a dream or something, which makes it a little awkward. The older of the 2 Grimm sisters. But in this book, they're actually like finding their parents, finding who they think is the head of the Red Hand, this mysterious organization that's pulling strings behind the scenes. Turns out, of course, not to be the case. There's 6 more books in the series. Of course, they're not going to find the actual culprit in book 3. We all knew that. But things don't end up going the way that, everybody hopes. This, again, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fairy tale portions of it. Was I necessarily as hooked into the individual narrative in this book? No. However, what this book did for the macro plot was phenomenal. I loved how it took what felt episodic in book 2, and I loved, but it translated that into the bigger macro plot, and I love putting all of those pieces together. And again, doing that, putting it into that macro plot definitely still reminded me of Once Upon a Time. So again, really good. This leaves off on a bit of a cliffhanger, not exactly the same type as book 2, but I'm still enjoying this series and will definitely continue on with it. That brings me to the book I read today. This was not a book that was on my TBR. This was not a book that I even realized I would own this week, because it is a book that I talked about and showed yesterday that I got at the book fair at my school, and that is Squire. And I picked this one. I didn't feel like reading necessarily any of the books that I had physically. I had a little bit more time today because I didn't go into school today. I did teacher evaluations. It's another committee thing that I participate on. So I went to a school that was much closer to mine, took out the driving time, the transportation, etc., and had a little bit of extra time because of that. So I decided, since I wasn't feeling any of the books on my TBR cart, I decided I'm going to come back, I'm going to pick up a graphic novel, I'm going to find one that has blue for Polathon. I still need to enter all of my books for Polathon. I love this book so much. This might be one of the best fantasy graphic novels I've read. One of the others that I really love is Crumbs. So this probably will have a very similar rating, probably a 4.5 star. This book is set in a fantastical world, but there's not a lot of technically fantasy elements. I didn't mind that. It was set in an area that's maybe supposed to evoke the Ottoman Empire or one of those empires in the Middle East. The main character, I don't know how to pronounce her name. Aiza, A-I-Z-A. She is young-ish. The book never says what her age is. And the artist talks about in the end, when she's talking about her process in creating this, that she wanted to portray her as smaller than everybody else. So you can't necessarily try to figure out her age based on her size. The comparison there, she's probably around 14, 15, maybe 16. And she is part of a tribe of people, a group of people recently conquered by this empire. The lore of this world is that these people in this area were once united, then they split into multiple different factions. There was a lot of fighting between them, and now there's this new empire who's going around to conquer all of these different places to bring back the glory of this bygone era. Whether or not that's true, this book doesn't explain. You don't know necessarily whether it's true. it doesn't even need to be true for this story. But anyway, Isa wants to enlist and sign up to potentially become a squire because they are promised the freedom to live without all of these onerous restrictions that were placed on them. Because her people group, they had to get permission, they had to live in these certain areas, they had to get permission to leave, they had to get permission to do certain jobs, they were really looked down upon. So she really wants to become a squire so that she can basically have freedom of movement in her own world. Now, does it turn out to be more than that? Of course it does. So she ends up, and this people group also, they tattoo their forearms, usually their right arm. But anyway, it's part of their culture, but it's also a way that people look down upon them. And so her parents don't want her to do this. They see how much she wants this. So they're like, okay, we will support you, but we really want you to take this and we want you to cover your forearm. We want you to have a better chance at doing this because it's not illegal for her as part of this tribe to participate in this competition, basically, to try to become a squire. But she will be looked down upon if they know who she is, basically, or where she's from. On the way, she meets another guy who seems a bit haphazard, who's a quite interesting character who I really loved. There were developments or hints at different relationships, different ways that he was expressing himself, and backstory for him even. I would love so much more to be written in this world. There's so much that this author laid out on the table. It's like a smorgasbord, and we got just a sampling of it. I don't know if more is going to be explored in this world. I would love for it to be. But of course, most of this book is taking place over her attempt to become a squire. And there are other things going on behind the scenes that complicate it. There's intrigue. There's a gruff character who's the groundskeeper who takes her under his wing reluctantly and trains her. It's just so heartwarming, and I love the way that the author and the illustrator bring all of these together. The artwork in here is phenomenal. I loved this artwork so much. The color palette is stunning. Everything worked together so well. This was an unexpected joy to read, and I highly recommend it. Now, hearing myself talk about it, I probably will end up rating it higher than Crumbs even, so this might get a 5-star. This might be my first 5-star graphic novel. We shall see when I run it through Compile. Who knows when I'll actually do that. Okay, I'm back with the last clip of the vlog. I don't anticipate reading anything more today. It is Sunday, wrapping everything up. I actually have 4 books to talk about. That sounds more impressive probably than it actually is. All of these are middle grades. It's looking once again like I'm going to have adult and middle grade, but I guess that's just where the situation is. Anyway, I am going to talk first about the 2 books that I read physically. So this helps with my ARC goal because I had an ARC of this book, Falling Out of Time. I didn't realize when I requested it that it's actually a sequel, like 20-ish years later from this book, Running Out of Time, which is actually, I discovered, Margaret Peterson Haddock's debut novel. Let's talk about these books. This one, incredibly short. And it's really interesting, the scenarios when you talk about these books, because this one, less than 200 pages. This one is like 320-ish, 340-ish, something like that. So about double in length. And it's basically a similar scenario that happens in both, only the situations are sort of flip-flopped. So in this one, basically the scenario, and I'm going to double check that it gives it away in the synopsis. Oh, yes, it does. So in this one, the main character, Jessie, is living in what she thinks is 1840s Indiana, or 1840 exactly. But it turns out that it's actually 1996. And there's this whole conspiracy with what's going on at the village where they live, and she has to escape, and there's culture shock, and all that sorts of things, and she's trying to help rescue everybody because a diphtheria epidemic has been, I think, planted or maybe just broke out or something in there, and they're not giving them modern medicine. So that's the course of this book. It moves very quickly. It puts in some hypothetical ideas and discussions, and I don't know whether it was a product of the time, because this was written and published in 1996, I believe, 1995. But there were a handful of things, like when she first escapes and she's meeting this school group, and I guess Haddix is showing, you know, what she may have believed if she grew up in 1840 and how she viewed African Americans. Because there's one girl in that school group, the one that shows a bit of skepticism about what's going on, but this is the way that was referred to. I'm like, okay, I know that happened back then, and some of the stuff gets pushed back upon, but you never see her learning and growing at all from that mindset, I should say. And it gets really, I mean, a lot of it is incredibly predictable. And yes, part of that is this is a middle grade book, and it's very quick. There's not a lot of time to dwell on things or anything like that. This was not a bad read. I've read a few other books that have that sort of Truman Show component to them, where someone thinks one thing about the life that they're living, but really they're living basically so that other people can watch them and view them. This is much definitely better than, I think it's called That Just Show, that I read a couple years ago for one of the SASL lists. This is definitely a lot better than that. That one I did not like at all. I think it was definitely a good thing to read this first before going into this book. But at the same time, there were distinct plot beats and things that were going on in here that went on in here. And this is a reverse of the time situation, where the main character here, Zola, thinks that it's 2193. It's not. It's 2023. So I think that's almost the same time gap, like 150, 140 years, only in the opposite direction. But in this case, they've set up two different Futurevilles. One is setting off, like, with all of these terrible things happening to the world, if you make these choices, then this is the future that we can have, and it's great, and it's utopian. It's basically the world that Zola lives in. And then on the other hand, it's, if we don't change anything and we keep polluting our earth and etc., it's dystopian, and this is what it could be. One of the things that really bothered me is, like, okay, I knew what the setup was going to be. Not only is this whole Futurevilles thing set up, that concept, but it's built on the exact same site of that Clifton Village of this book. There was so much hullabaloo with the tearing down of that, and like, how could they do that to these people, and etc. and etc. So why on earth would people let that happen again on the exact same site? Could it potentially happen? I mean, maybe. I don't know. It just seemed more than a bit absurd. One thing I will say, I think the idea of fabricating future technology is a whole lot more difficult than fabricating past technology, because there were certain things that were happening that I'm like, I mean, no duh, that's what's happening. Obviously, these Insta closets, she even mentions right away that it's not actually instant. It takes about 5 minutes or so. And like, of course, someone's going in there and someone's putting in whatever you ordered. I mean, I guess, so you know that she's related to Jessie in this book because she has the exact same last name. You know she's got to be related. At first, I was thinking that her mom was actually Jessie, and I'm like, why on earth would Jessie have done that after all she experienced there? It's not, but she is related, and it's basically the next generation of that family. This was way too bloated. This was way too long. There was a lot that happened. I don't know. It was fine, I guess, but incredibly predictable and not really realistic in a lot of ways. Because, like, apparently she didn't know what cell phones were. Even if they didn't necessarily talk about it in their history VRs, virtual realities, she would have known what a cell phone is. We know a lot about previous technology. And there were just a lot of things about the modern world that made her basically seem as deer in the headlights as Jessie in the other book. I finished this. Well, before I finished it, I went and looked at some of the reviews on Storygraph because I had already started to sour on it. And a lot of them, most of them were talking about the predictability, the very in-your-face messaging. I don't know what I'll end up writing this, but this is not a series that I'm going to pick up and purchase and put in my home library. I should have paid more attention to who the author was, because I don't think that there has been yet a Margaret Peterson Haddock's book that I have really, really enjoyed. I think what happens is the premise behind her books really intrigues me, but the execution never ends up working for me, which is unfortunate. So I'm going to hold up just one of these when I'm reviewing them, because I'm going to talk about them together as a story. So backing up a little bit. The first book in this series, The Last Fallen Star, was the, I think, second book in the Rick Riordan Presents imprint that I read. The first was Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. And unfortunately for this, the first book in this series, it had to compare to what I think might be one of the best offerings from the Rick Riordan Presents imprint. And so I kind of soured on it, and I thought I rated it a lot lower than I did. When I looked back at my review, it turns out that I rated it 4 stars, which is the level that for me means I'm going to keep going with it. And I didn't for a very long time. And I don't even remember what my issues were for that series. This, I really ended up enjoying the exploration of this Korean mythology, because a lot of times Korean mythology, Asian mythology, it gets overshadowed by Chinese and Japanese. And I think that Gracie Kim did a really good job in building up this character. So in the first one, you have 2 sisters. One of them is adopted, and she knows that her parents have always been open with her. And her older sister is 1 month older. I forget exactly what goes wrong in there, but somehow she is not inducted into the clan that her family has always been a part of, because she doesn't seem to have any of that magic. Her clan, I forget what the patron goddess was, but it's a clan of healing. She desperately wants to be part of this, and in trying to do that, she messes something up. And there are consequences from that, and there's fallout from that. Things wrap up in the first book, but you know that there's more to come. This one, Last Fallen Moon, picks up almost immediately after that. And because there had been such a gap between when I read Last Fallen Star and when I picked this up, obviously there's a little bit of culture shock, a little bit of having to ease into it, remember certain things, remember certain characters. But that unfamiliar stage, it wrapped up fairly quickly, and I got back into the story. And what Riley, the main character, wants to do is she wants to go find another patron deity for her clan, because through her actions in the first book, that patron deity is no longer alive, you could say, and her clan has lost all of their magic, lost all of their healing magic, and she beats herself up about it and wants to fix it. So she has to descend into the spirit realm to try to fix this. And she ends up meeting Dole, I think is how you pronounce his name, and it turns out that he has a connection to her, but he's a really quirky character who ends up coming alongside her to help her through different things. Riley is going into the spirit realm, expecting everything that she's learned in all of her histories about what these different seven hells are and how she's going to be judged. And things are like, wait a second, this looks like New York. And these different hells are now vacations? What is going on here? I really like how Kim turned that on its head. In this book, it ends up taking that, what was a very narrow focused plot, and expanding it and building more upon things that were introduced in the first book and don't actually get a conclusion until you get to the third book. I definitely got hooked way back into this series with this particular book. One other thing I'll mention, there is a character that is introduced in here that seems like they're going to be the big bad guy, But the way things wrap up, you think, oh, maybe he's just misunderstood or something or other. But that comes back into play with this book, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment because I have to go change the battery. Okay, fresh battery in. I left off and I was just going to start talking about the conclusion to this trilogy. I think that Gracie Kim wrapped it up really well in here. She definitely ramps up the stakes a lot and brings in a lot more of the mythology, and she also has a lot of callbacks to the first book even. Callbacks to the first book, callbacks to the second book, and she does that in a way where you know that it was purposeful how she laid out everything in each 3 books of the series. A lot of times I wonder about, especially like children's books or other narratives, even adult fantasy or whatever, if it's actually laid out, if they wrote the first book so it could stand on its own and then thought of things to open it up even more. Clearly, Gracie Kim did not do that. Clearly, she had a path in mind, and I really enjoyed that. And towards the end, you always think with a book like this, where stakes are ramping up and you have to solve a problem before the bad guys or whoever in this book do the unthinkable thing. And you have to solve that before it. And you know that the plot is going to reach its climax right before that happens. And then the hero's going to step in some unlikely way and solve the problem. Yes, is that stereotypical of a lot of books? Of course. But that doesn't make it any less satisfying. But at the same time, when you have an author who can subvert that, it makes it even better. And that's what happens here, because the unthinkable actually happens. And you wonder how things are going to be made right. Is the author going to retcon a lot of stuff? Is the author going to pull a Deus Ex Machina? Gracie Kim does not do that. This also includes a significant character death. And you think, oh no, this character died. The stakes are raised. But a lot of times in books like these, something happened, something is reversible, and that character comes back to life. But at the same time, you don't want to leave them completely like without comfort. Gracie Kim manages to solve that in a really, really good and fascinating way. But at the same time, she takes what she did for that one character and then applies it to the titular character towards the end, the very end of the book. And I just went, I don't know that I'm satisfied with that. I don't know that that feels like a particularly satisfying end, even though that's probably what she's been leading up to this whole time. So I finished this book feeling a little bit like, oh, that's how it ends? Okay, I see how that works. I see how that's probably the ending that it should have had. I don't know if my reactions would be the same as other characters, not other characters, other readers. It just was a little bit of a letdown for me. But I think it shows the real skill that Gracie Kim had in reading these books. Writing these books, I should say. I was the one reading them. Anyway, so these are the 2 for my Rick Riordan's project, and it helps me finish a series. Not necessarily a series that I started before BookTube. That I managed with the Al Capone series by reading one and then DNFing the rest. So, in comparison to last week, I'm getting my mojo back. But it has to be said that all of these, save one, were middle grade books. So I read a lot of middle grade books, and the one that was not middle grade was a graphic novel. So this definitely helped in my book count, but that means that I'm going to be transitioning into more of my ARC books and more of my Goodreads Choice Awards 2023 books in the second half of the month. I do have 2 other books on my quote-unquote required list. One I'm going to start reading today, and that it's the series to start, and that's A Winter's Promise. That is YA, so I'll finally have some YA this year. And the other is Black AF History. I can't start that one until the 16th. I mean, I could read it physically, but I want to listen to the audiobook of it, and my Everand unlimited subscription doesn't roll over until the 16th. So I'm going to start reading that one then, which is end of this week. So I hopefully will tackle that end of this week. These are all of the books that I read this second week of February. Looks like I'm getting my reading mojo back. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.